Hello and welcome to Ahval Podcasts, the home of objective, up-to-date and independent reporting on Turkey. Don't forget to follow our reports through social media, on ahvalnews.com or through our mobile app. Let's get started.
Hello and welcome to Hot Pursuit, part of Ahval podcast series. Today we are going to talk about much awaited rerun election of Istanbul, which was announced, which is a result of the cancellation by the Turkish Supreme Electoral Council of the 31st of March elections. And the repeat elections will be held this Sunday. And it's, as everyone seems to agree, an election much wider and larger than Istanbul. It's about Turkey. To speak about and analyze the issue, my guest is Professor Henri Barkey with Lehigh University and a joint scholar with Council on Foreign Relations. Welcome, Henri.
Thank you.
Well, you have written an article today in The National, and earlier also, I think it was dated 10th of May, already you had concluded that Erdoğan, by forcing a cancellation of the earlier elections in Istanbul, had committed a political suicide. And all the indicators at the moment, by some reliable pollsters, show at 7 to 9 percentage points of difference in disfavor of Erdoğan and his candidate, Binali Yıldırım. So, what's the latest? What's your take on where things have sort of twisted and turned?
Well, first of all, it's clear that President Erdoğan made a mistake by calling for a second election. I mean, it was a gamble he took, a gamble that maybe he would be able to pull a rabbit out of the hat, that somehow he and his organization would mobilize voters who had not shown up the first time, or maybe even play with the results. But clearly, the opposition candidate is benefiting from a wave of sympathy, even probably among AKP voters. There's a sense in Istanbul that Mr. İmamoğlu was done an injustice when they canceled the elections and they forced a rerun in a very dubious circumstances. So I think there is this backlash now that is taking place. And in Turkey, this notion of fairness is a very important one. And I think many AKP voters are going to vote against the AKP precisely because of the way he behaved. So I think in that sense, Mr. Erdoğan made a mistake. And I think everything he has said in the last few days, including things that Mr. Yıldırım has said in the last few days, indicate that they have concluded that they will lose the election and they will not be able to, shall we say, cheat their way out of the result. And so they're looking at alternative ways of getting rid of Mr. İmamoğlu should he become the mayor of Istanbul. And we've already seen an increasing rhetoric by both Mr. Erdoğan and Mr. Yıldırım that Mr. İmamoğlu will be prosecuted allegedly for things he said when he was visiting the province of Ordu, things that he actually did not say, but that the press, the pro-Erdoğan press, which represents 90% of the press in Turkey, has essentially made up. So they will probably try to overthrow him. Just by the way, the same we've already seen in Ankara. There's a lawsuit that has been started against the CHP winner of the Ankara mayoralty, Mr. Mansur Yavaş, and they may even get rid of both of them under very dubious circumstances. And once that is done, there won't be much people can do about it. And since there are no elections for the next 4 years in Turkey, Erdoğan and company will be able to sail through, they think, in the next 4 years and not worry about having to deal with the electorate. I think that's a terrible mistake. I think it's going to create a lot of discontent. And it's going to force people to look for alternative ways of opposing the Erdoğan regime. It's going to polarize the situation. And I don't think Mr. Erdoğan is going to come out the winner out of this.
I see. The pattern is sort of puzzling for many observers of Turkey. If we base our analysis on the presumption that both Konda and Metropol, in their predictions after their latest surveys, which are done in mid-June, this shows an interesting pattern that for the past 4 or 5 years following Gezi protests, derailing of democratization, ordination of the judiciary, violation of human rights to the point of even bringing back torture as a systematic method, Turkish voters largely did not seem to mind about this, but something has changed because both Konda and Metropol predict between 7 and 9 percentage points of difference in favor of İmamoğlu. Metropol even indicates that this may surpass 10%, going towards 12, 13 percentage points. What is this change? This is particularly a Turkish pattern, it seems to me.
Well, I don't know whether it's a Turkish pattern. I mean, I don't. However, as I intimated earlier, I think the way Erdoğan and company forced the cancellation of the Istanbul elections, because it was done in a very obvious way. First of all, the night of the elections, if you remember, the Anatolian agency, the official agency of the state, stopped providing numbers because the numbers were going in favor of Mr. İmamoğlu. Again, you see how Erdoğan controls the state. Then they objected to the results and they said that the opposition stole the results. Everybody in Turkey knows that the AKP completely controls every aspect of the state, including the electoral system. So there is no way the CHP could have manipulated the results, because CHP, the opposition party, is so weak, essentially, organizationally, as well as compared to the AKP, that was completely impossible. So they came up with this false narrative that the CHP had stolen. And then they canceled in Istanbul only the metropolitan mayoralty race. Whereas when people went to vote, they voted for all other levels of municipal government, including the local districts. In the local districts, the AKP did relatively well. So the AKP chose not to cancel those, but only canceled the metropolitan mayoralty election. So people thought this, I'm sure people thought this was very, very dubious, because why is it that you're only targeting the race that you lost, but not targeting the others, right? So all of these essentially indicate that this was a really unfair use of state power against Mr. İmamoğlu. And there is now a wave of sympathy, if you want, and it has galvanized the opposition much more. Even people who probably were sympathetic to İmamoğlu and did not vote on March 31st because, they were busy, they had other things to do. It was very clear from all the discussions on social media, etc., that people were organizing themselves, canceling trips, etc., on to be in Istanbul in order to vote. So the way Erdoğan and company undid the March 34 elections, which were really legitimate, I think rubbed the Turkish public the wrong way. And this sense of unfairness, I think, is what is galvanizing. By contrast, the AKP doesn't have an organizing, shall we say, narrative, other than saying, they stole the elections, and people really don't believe that. So in that sense, I think the AKP did a real blunder in the way they actually canceled the elections.
So you don't seem to believe that the worsening economy has not been a major factor in this change?
I don't think so. Between March 31st and today, right, the economy has declined somewhat, but not in a way that is significant enough to explain such a swing of this magnitude. I mean, we're talking about a potential 8% difference between Mr. Imamoglu and Mr. Yildirim, whereas they were neck and neck. What separated them was 13,000 votes on March 31st, and now we're talking about hundreds of thousands of votes. So that cannot be explained by 3 months of economic news. This is purely an Istanbul reaction to the way in which Mr. Erdoğan conducted the election. I mean, he dealt with the election results and his loss.
We should finally, again, repeat that we are basing this analysis on the predictions that are coming from the credible pollsters. If they prove to be true, of course, 7 to 9 percentage points of difference is really very, very unusual. If you look back at past 16, 17, 18 years in disfavor of the AKP. If they prove to be true, again, as you write in your article, Erdoğan will face, given, of course, the deepening systemic crisis in Turkey, economy, politics, etc., judiciary, will have choices. What is, given that these predictions are true, what will be his choices?
Well, I mean, he obviously has only two choices. One is to accept the results and be magnanimous and say, look, the people have voted, I accept the vote, and these elections were clean. I mean, I think he can take the high ground, right? And then what he will probably do, if he were to accept the results, is make Mr. Imamoglu's life impossible. That is to say, remember that the majority of the sub-districts in Istanbul are under AKP control after the March 31st elections, which means that they can do a lot of damage to Mr. Imamoglu's projects. They can create roadblocks. So Erdoğan can accept the results and then usurp the authority of Mr. Imamoglu through a variety of means he has and powers he has at his disposal. In a way, that is probably the smart thing for him to do, but he is so, at the moment, angry at the fact that Istanbul voters voted against him, that he wants to undo the election results by any means possible, which means that he will figure out a way for the judiciary to remove Mr. Imamoglu on bogus charges. And he said it. I mean, he said it yesterday. He said it in a very plain language. He said, we will not accept this guy to become the mayor of Istanbul because he insulted the governor of Ordu, the province of Ordu, and somebody like that cannot become the mayor of Istanbul, and will remove him. I mean, he was very clear about this, and I think he might do that. Here's the problem for Erdoğan. Erdoğan is surrounded by people who basically say that he's always right, that he never makes mistakes. So he has sycophants around him who never challenge him. This is the result of the fact that he has now purged the party of anybody of any standing. So everybody who's in the party are, at the moment, anybody around him are people who are benefiting from his rule. People who make money out of his rule, people who have political positions out of his rule. So they're not willing to tell the Reis, so to say, the president, he's making a mistake. Right? Nobody's saying essentially that the emperor has no cause, and that's the problem for Erdoğan. Somebody has to be able to say to him, "Look, you're doing something wrong, and this is going to backfire." But he reads the Turkish press, and the Turkish press is basically under his command. So he's reading the stuff that he tells them to write, right? But it is also very clear that in the last few days that he now realizes that he's going to lose the Istanbul elections, right? So there is this disjunction, if you want, between what he sees in the Erdoğan press, so to say, and what reality is. Suddenly, he's waking up to that. But Istanbul is far too important for him to lose. And unfortunately, I think we're going to see a major crisis develop.
Part of the major crisis to be expected, of course, under these circumstances it's such a critical juncture that after the elections, Erdoğan will meet President Trump. Today, in a press conference to the Foreign Press Corps in Ankara, he said something like, not referring to it word by word, but he says he trusts Trump and they have a good understanding with each other. And he hopes that Trump will understand his arguments that America needs Turkey, and he will do, as he expects, his utmost to help Erdoğan about getting out of the S-400 F-35 crisis. What's your take on that?
Well, look, he is very deliberately playing to Trump's, shall we say, ego. I mean, we know that Trump makes decisions on the basis of personalities on a whim. After all, he decided to get out of Syria in a phone call to Mr. Erdoğan, and it was a decision that he took on a whim because, he likes Erdoğan and trusts Erdoğan just like he trusts Putin. I mean, he likes all these authoritarian leaders, and so Erdoğan is playing him. The problem for Erdoğan in the S-400 F-35 issue is that Congress now is in a bipartisan way. The Republicans and Democrats are completely opposed to this deal, and they will do everything that's possible to stop it. So even if Trump were to try to find a way of marrying the F-35 to the S-400 deal, right, he will see enormous resistance, not just in the Pentagon and the bureaucracy, but also in Congress. And Trump, at this stage, I don't think can afford a major crisis of this sort at home, because you're seeing that on foreign policy, at least, the Republicans and the Democrats are getting together and becoming a little bit more assertive. For example, they just voted to suspend arms sales to Saudi Arabia despite Trump's opposition. Now, Trump will ignore them and will still sell arms to Saudi Arabia, but you see that the Republicans and Democrats on the Hill are now becoming far more aggressive, if you want, when it comes to foreign policy. So is Trump going to have a major crisis at home just to be able to help his buddy Erdoğan? I very much doubt it. I mean, he may try initially, but he will give up. Just like, on the question of Syria, he said yes to Erdoğan, and then he had to backtrack because of opposition within the United States. So it seems to me that he cannot save Erdoğan on the S-400 crisis. And look, I mean, at this stage, Erdoğan is going to go to Japan with two major problems with the United States. One is the S-400 crisis, and the other is northern Syria, on which there hasn't been that much progress, at least as far as I know. And these are two contentious issues. And I would argue that because Erdoğan also will be somewhat weakened as a result of Istanbul, he will not have the firepower, so to say, to push the Americans. But Trump is a wild card. I mean, nobody in this country actually knows what Trump is going to do from one day to another. And so I would not put it past Trump to make a deal with Erdoğan, but I suspect that deal will die the moment Trump comes back to Washington from Japan.
Mm-hmm. Okay, today the subject of our extended conversation was about much awaited, much focused. Everybody is focused on that. The elections, local elections, mayoral elections rather, in Istanbul between two candidates, Ekrem İmamoğlu and Binali Yıldırım. And my guest to analyze this subject was Professor Henri Barkey, Lehigh University academician. Tekrar ediyorum bunu. Well, our subject today in our extended conversation was the local elections, repeated mayoral elections, as it is called in Istanbul, due this Sunday. And my guest was Professor Henri Barkey with Lehigh University and adjunct scholar with the Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you, Henri, for this conversation.
Thank you.